Capture the passion.
Hey everybody, welcome to Capture the Passion. I'm your host, Alex DeJean, and today the idea for the episode is IDEA: inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access. For those of you who don't know, diversity, inclusion, equity, and access highlights efforts towards underserved communities by addressing structural inequalities. And today we have a very special guest to talk about that. We have the director of the CPTP program.
Let's be real, this is the head honcho, right?
The head honcho.
Who runs the entire program.
I'm literally not. Yvonne Rivas wouldn't appreciate
What is your role with CPTP?
Yeah. Suzanne, do you mind introducing yourself and telling us your role?
What's your role?
I am Suzanne Edwards Acton. I am the Director of Equity Initiatives for CPTP, which is Community Partnerships for Teacher Pipeline. That's what the CPTP stands for. So I am the Director of Equity Initiatives, not of the whole program.
Awesome. Does that deserve an applause?
No.
Just a little one. Just a little
Okay.
I
one.
think it also deserves a mic drop. If
Sure,
these mics
I'll
were
take
not
it.
connected
Yeah.
to these stands, I would have done a mic drop right
Okay.
there.
But that's a really long title. I
Sure.
like it. It sounds prestigious. Can we break that down for our audience so we know exactly
Sure.
what that entails?
Yeah. Well, on behalf of people of color, I will accept that it is prestigious, not for me personally, but for all of us.
Yes.
So the Director of Equity Initiatives put into the grant that the design is that there would be someone who just has eyes on everything that's kind of the initiative is all about. So this is a race-based initiative, and we are, and I think Alex already said this, we are strengthening the teaching profession by increasing the number of teachers of color. So that means many things, but part of what I do is to make sure that framework around racial equity, that perspective is always there in everything that we do, from it being like flyers for recruitment or just wording on things that have to do with recruitment, holding space in ways that are being culturally responsive to, we do a lot of things in the Teacher Mentor Network. That is one of the components. And we want to make sure that, we make sure that there's things like there's music, and what music do we play when we come into our Teacher Mentor Network.
Oh, yeah.
We do grounding practices as we come in, make sure we do land acknowledgement. So I'm the person who makes sure that all of that is in place, and we're doing that not as sort of, it's just kind of a, I don't know how to put that, but sometimes we do that, and no, we always do that. We hold space in certain ways to make sure that people of color know this is really a place for us to build both belonging and kinship, as well as what we're thinking about, what we're talking about, this conversation right now, that we're open and intentional and not hidden and kind of trying to be covert about that. No, we are being overt. This is a race-based initiative. There is a need. Our teaching profession has a need for, there to be teachers of color. And I think sometimes people think that the reason for that is primarily because students need to see themselves in their teachers in order to consider becoming a teacher. But it's more than that. Society needs there to be teachers of color. White children need teachers of color. So it's not only, this is a community-based initiative, but just in general, all of society in every school in every neighborhood need for there to be teachers of color, because we learn about people and we learn different ways of doing things by having those adults be with us.
Yeah.
So, in the classroom there's a lot of white teachers.
But I think even outside the classroom, we need more administrators. I don't know if you know this. You might know, Suzanne, that the new superintendent for the LAUSD, Alberto Carvalho, he is originally from Miami. He's from Florida. He started off as a science teacher and worked his way up into administration. And one of the things he sort of was talking about, because I was listening to him sort of in an interview in a podcast recently, one of the things that was crazy to him was that he is the first superintendent in the past, I think, 30 or 40 years of the Los Angeles Unified School District who actually speaks Spanish in a community where 70%,
wow.
yeah. He is the first superintendent in decades. And I think he was one of the few candidates interviewed for the position who also spoke Spanish.
Right.
And sort of when he was talking about that need, about we need more people of color.
So even in the selection process, you're saying that he was one of the few that spoke Spanish who they were even looking at.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, if I remember his interview correctly, one thing, and it was totally shocking when I heard that. And it really is an issue, because when we look at education, or at least in K-12 education or higher education, it's always from a structural standpoint the issues that, we don't have administrators that really understand students or can empathize with students. We don't have teachers who can empathize and work with students more effectively.
Sure. Yeah, and I love that. I didn't really know that about the superintendent. And I think that sometimes people don't realize that, like, when you come from a community, you understand things about that community, or you come from a culture, you understand things about that culture. But you also understand that people who also come from under-resourced communities, that there's ways that we do things that are not necessarily the same,
Yeah.
And it's not that there's something wrong with the way that a white teacher might do something, and particularly one who has, like we were talking earlier about, a distinct understanding of critical consciousness. So, and a lot of people think that, like, that word critical, what that means in that term is it's an analysis of, like, the ways things happen, the ways things run, and it's an acknowledgement that there are things that have happened both in history and currently that are systemic, that are still going on, even though there are laws that might have changed. Procedures don't change at the same time as laws change. Laws time out. And you can also see how right now, like, all of the stuff around voter suppression, there is the United States really literally has like a practice of certain practices that create oppression. And for some people that's hard to hear, but that is a reality, that we do things on a national level and on large scale that are oppressive. And so because that is a part of the way that our culture is, it has impacts. And if you don't know that, or you're not willing to acknowledge that, then we stay sort of at status quo, and that thing is sort of hidden. And typically, not always, but typically, people of color have an awareness, even if it's just an interpersonal awareness, like, I've had these things happen to me, I've had interactions, I've had microaggressions happen to me, like, that's a person-to-person thing. But also, sometimes we have an understanding because of our own family's history or whatever, that the systems exist. And so we need people of color who understand that. We also need white colleagues who understand that. And then that we understand that the way I hold space as a teacher in my classroom, if I don't know about those things that I was just talking about, then I hold my space of my classroom in a certain way that may or may not hold great regard for the many cultures of my students.
So I'm curious though, because you mentioned how we need white teachers to understand this. Coming from a background where they are not directly experienced with these oppressive systems,
Sure.
And people will say that they come from privileged backgrounds, sure. Right? How do they begin to understand that?
Sure.
Can they understand that?
Sure. I say that I do think that you can, I don't think that you have to actually understand someone else's experience, like, personally, in order to know that it exists, in order to know that these differences exist and that the oppressive systems exist. So being nice and being kind and being empathetic, it's even actually beyond that. It's being knowledgeable. One is that you need to know that they, like I said, that they exist, and so they're going to be, the systems are going to be impacting, and that on a smaller scale, interpersonal things are going to be happening, and also that if you don't know, you're kind of playing a part in it.
Yeah.
So you can be knowledgeable that you are, or you can be lacking in knowledge that you are. So yes, white teachers can be a part of helping to resolve some of these issues. Absolutely. They can help hold space in the classroom. They can, but that then comes for a lot of learning on their behalf.
Yeah.
And also as people of color, we have a lot of learning to do.
Because at the same time, we could sit back and say that they have a lot of learning, but then I guess that's where that wall kind of goes up, right? Where they feel like maybe they're the ones being discriminated against.
Sure.
And by no means are we saying that we shouldn't have white teachers in the
Absolutely.
classroom,
And that's
right?
exactly what I'm trying to say, is that it's not that we should.
Yeah. But I think it's even what Suzanne talked about, and I think this is a really important thing, is just having the space for having those discussions.
Absolutely.
Because I think you're totally right that somebody could, at the bare minimum, in order to be more empathetic or to understand other people's viewpoint, is to just have a space that way you can listen to them and know it. It's funny that we were in a meeting with a couple of students in the program, and one or two of the students were talking about how uncomfortable and how unsafe they felt at their high school because their high school has police officers as security, and they are armed, and they are very honestly afraid of being in any way injured by the security at the school, which is really crazy because a couple years ago, me and 3 of my Latinx colleagues and 1 or 2 of our white colleagues were sort of hanging out, talking about what it's like in LA. And I think the really big difference between is knowing and understanding is that myself and my minority colleagues in LA, we have all had police pull guns on us. And our other colleagues, they knew, oh yeah, the LAPD sometimes is institutionally racist or does things, and they know that, oh yeah, sometimes I guess socially police will pull guns on minorities. But for them to have been in the room with us while all 4 of us said, oh, hey, you've had a couple of guns on you, me too, you've had one pull on you, and it was really great for us as a minority to be like, hey, cool, this is terrible, but really nice that we've all had this experience. And for our colleagues, it didn't become real until they heard it from us, and they knew somebody who had experienced this.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people are kind of blown away because they really believe that it happens if you do something wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, they truly and sincerely believe that.
I was wearing a suit when a cop pulled a gun on me.
Yeah,
I was wearing a suit and tie.
am very involved in my church, and one of the clergy people was up in the valley. This happened. It was the day that there was a daytime service. I don't remember what it was, but he was literally in his clerics, so he was in the robes and stuff and everything. And there was someone had done something in the neighborhood, and the police came by, and he was the only black man in the space at that moment, and they literally pulled him out. He had just finished a service, and people were just in awe, like, what is happening right now?
Yeah.
And it just was a black man who happened to be in that neighborhood.
Oh my God.
So he must be the one. I don't know, but I think for some people, that's the kind of knowledge that I'm talking about. That's the more you can, like you said, Alex, be in conversation and come to understanding on the topics. And it's not
funny because you say that, and I feel like that's a perfect kind of analogy for myself, because I understand that world. I understand that world exists. I haven't personally seen it though. In my experiences, all of my experiences with police officers have been great, even when I know I was in the wrong, right? And so, but I understand that world does exist, right? And so I can have those conversations. So I think that when we were talking about having the white teachers in the classroom, it's having that understanding where we can have that conversation and not completely disregard it, because we know that world exists. I may have just been a fortunate person, right? An outlier to so to say.
And I don't know that you're necessarily an outlier. I don't think it happens to everyone, but I do think it happens disproportionately. And I think that I would imagine, and I might be wrong about this, it might be an unfair assumption, but imagine you might know someone that's happened to, and even personally know someone that's happened to, and even many white people that I know don't even know anyone personally that's happened to.
Good point.
And so I think it's not only being in a neighborhood or a community or a space or a lived experience, but it's also being proximate to that experience. So it might be my best friend's brother, it might be my own dad or uncle, my son, and it has happened to my son, you know what I mean? And so, and even my own son didn't believe it, because he looks a lot like me, and so he has a lot of friends that are white and several friends that are black, and when he's with his white friends, that's never even been an issue ever. And when he started to drive, I would talk to him about it and say, you really need to be careful. And he's like, oh my God, Mom, what are you talking about? Who's the they that you're talking about? When I'd say they, whatever. And when he got pulled over once, and he said, oh yeah, the cop told me I needed to check my back light. And as soon as he told me, I went, who were you with? And he's like, oh my God, you're always blaming me for doing something wrong. I go, no, I'm not. Because immediately my mom sense went on, right? My black mom sense went on. And I go, who are you with? And he's like, I didn't do anything wrong. I go, I didn't say you did something wrong. Who are you with? So finally, when the car gets checked out, blah, 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 I say to my husband, so what they say about the back light? Nothing was wrong with the back light. I look at my son again, and I go, who were you with? Which of your friends were you with? And then he's like, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, you were driving 5 feet, right? And he said, yeah. And I'm like, no, this thing is real. It's real. That does not going to happen to you when you're driving with your white friends in the car. It's just probably not going to happen.
So then, I think this is really good, this brings a really good conversation about that, because if we want to try to bring these spaces, and especially now with the Supreme Court hearings and with all the backlash against critical race theory, it really seems like there is a push against even wanting to have these conversations. And I think these are really critical. But from your standpoint as an administrator and as somebody who is an advocate and a supporter for equity and inclusiveness and diversity, how do we even have these conversations, not only in a classroom setting for students, but also at an institutional setting? Because I know colleagues who just don't want to hear any of this.
You know, I love that you brought that up, because I don't think we should be doing anything with students that we are not doing ourselves. So I think before we do any of this and talk about any of this as being about doing this with our students, I think before that is us as a staff doing this work ourselves.
Yeah.
Both just as educators and then as people who are going to hold space. So if as a staff we're not talking about these things, we should not be talking about it with our students. That's just my own opinion. But I know, Alex, you come a lot to the Teacher Mentor Network, and we use Constructivist listening. I don't know that having conversations about this, and I mean conversations, dialogue back and forth, even like we're doing right now, I don't know that that's the best thing to do at the beginning. I think Constructivist listening, which is much more listening, I mean, it's based in listening, and it's based in, it's like it's rooted in us. Like even right now as we're talking, me like thinking about this, sometimes we make meaning when we are going to put words to something, and so we're constructing meaning as we're constructing the language to articulate it. So constructivist listening, I think, works really well, which is, that's what we time. We do time to we talk for timed amounts. I mean, for like 2 minutes, let's just say, and we'll pick whatever the topic's going to be, and then you talk for 2 minutes. I don't have to address it. I don't have to respond to it.
You're
All
giving
I
the
need to do
space for
is
them
just-
to
yeah,
kind
you
of
just-
air out. Yeah, I like that.
And
Oh
you're
my God, that happens
thinking.
all the time.
Yeah.
Like every time, at least for myself, having been at a lot of these different meetings, a lot of times students are expressing what it's like for them being in education, just sharing their experiences, because I think so rarely do they ever have a chance to actually share their viewpoint and share their life, and to have people actually listen to them and actively listen and understand, or at least try to understand.
I think I don't know. I see the topic, right, and I understand that it's difficult for teachers to want to have these conversations because of the possible consequences.
Sure.
I mean,
I agree.
right, especially in the current climate. I mean, we don't want to have something happen in the classroom that's outside of, well, I don't want to say it's outside of our control to a degree, but this is a conversation that there's so much diversity in the classroom. We don't know where these students are coming from. There's a high likelihood that something could happen that could cost this instructor their position, and it's scary to have that on the line. You know, so I don't know. I could see where instructors might want to shy away from having those discussions in the classroom, right? But
Yeah.
No, that's like, and I'll be the first to admit it. There have been times when I've taught a class in college, since I'm a community college instructor, where if I feel that if I bring these up, a student may complain or file a complaint.
Yeah.
I don't want there to
Yeah.
be any, like, I don't want extra scrutiny, because at least for myself as a part-time faculty member, I don't have any job security.
Right. We may
So,
not come back for
yeah.
the next semester.
Like,
I don't have tenure.
my job is based on how much my department chair likes me.
And so we're
Sure.
constantly weighing that, right?
Yeah.
We're weighing that in the back of our minds, and so it's like maybe we do want to have those conversations, but we're not in a position to have them.
Sure. And I guess I would ask then, kind of back to what I was saying before, I don't think we should be doing these things with our students that we're
Yes.
not doing ourselves. So as staff, I guess I would say, or as faculty or adjunct and all of that, are these conversations had by the instructors with each other? Is there a place for that ever?
I think so. I think sort of in the same way we have all these pockets of conversations in the American rhetoric with it. I think it also happens the exact same way at a faculty and institutional level, because I am part of multiple programs that are specializing in discussing and addressing issues of diversity and equity, versus when I'll talk with some of my colleagues, not only within my own like division of liberal arts or humanities, but also within my own department of communication. And sometimes some people are very much against it, because from their viewpoint, it's about, no, this is just rhetoric in the bad sense. It's just stuff to fill people's air, and it gets away from real stuff. The real thing is education. If you talk about this in your classroom,
It makes
Alex,
it worse.
like you're taking away from the curriculum the stuff
Sure.
you should be teaching your
Sure.
students, because as instructors we
But
do
I think,
have a
but I
set
think
of
you're
stuff.
kind of you're getting onto the point here, and I
Yes.
think what Suzanne was saying is because in my experience, the conversations are not happening, and it's a lot more telling than it is listening. So there isn't the conversation. It's more, this is how you approach this. This is what you should be doing, right? Instead of us having those conversations that we can then bring into a classroom because we've had them as instructors. That's a brilliant point.
Well, and I also think that this stuff is so nuanced. It's hard even to explain it, but like from a systemic level, there's ways of doing things that each different cultures have different ways of doing things. Our country the ways we do things were designed by colonizers. And so there are traits, actual traits of the ways of interaction that are like dominance. And I know people get all freaked out when you talk about this, but the real truth is like white
That's
dominance,
what we're here for. This is what we're here for. We
white
want to bring
dominance
this
culture and traits of colonization culture. It's an actual thing. Like, you know, when we go to parties of each of our, I don't know what your backgrounds really are. Like, I can say what I think by looking at you, and people often think I'm Latina, even though I'm Black, but I probably have the same gene pool as...
Me too.
Yeah, I probably have the same, though, gene pool based on my former history of my ancestors as some people who are Latinx, right? We just got taken to all different places. Black people are on a ship. Different ships just went everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And what happened once those bodies got there, the similar things happened that led to people that look like me and my family, right? Okay, so my point is just that there's ways that different cultures do things, and white dominance culture has ways of doing things. And some of those ways are kind of the things that we're talking about right now. So that you talk about or don't talk about certain things, the ways you approach things that make you uncomfortable, the things you strive for. Do you strive for excellence and always right, or do you strive for collaboration and not always necessarily right, but just like these are cultural things, right? And so we sometimes sort of say the ways that, like, academia, for example, does things, which is very connected to white dominance culture, is the way, the way, when it actually isn't the only way. So they become synonymous, but they're not really. And so the talking about this, the avoidance of talking about this, the wording that if you talk about it, it makes it worse. That's one sort of
So even all the
structural
stigmas you're
perspective.
saying are part of the way, right?
They're part of the
Part
way.
of these
And
mechanisms that are used as a defense.
Yeah, and
to
they're
protect
they're
the system,
so
to protect the status quo.
dominant and predominant, and actually then comes in the sort of minority, world minority, people of color, Black and brown people, just overall are the global minority, majority. I'm sorry, global majority. But in the United States, the majority way, and even the majority of number, is white and white dominance culture.
But then the problem comes if we go too far down that path, and we get labeled with the conspiracies and all that stuff.
Okay.
And,
Okay, sure.
Right.
But yeah, sure. But even labeling it that way, like some of this is just really happening, and whatever, we can disagree whether it's really happening or not, but we have the data. So why like, this is not a me perspective. I'm talking about real numbers. We can sit and look at data and numbers, and I don't disagree with you that there are people who totally hold that stance. And I would invite then for people to sit and then let's talk about numbers.
Yeah.
Let's literally sit down and look at numbers of things. And when we do that, we see evidence of disparities. And so how can we like take some numbers as being really important data-wise and other numbers as being not important, and kind of like decide which ones of those numbers are the right? So
how do you think we can do that? Because I think you bring up a good point, Eric, on how a lot of people now are more about telling rather than actually doing anything.
Sure.
And one of the things I was talking with some student leaders at a local community college about was a lot of the student leadership, their major criticism against the faculty was that a lot of the faculty they feel are just virtue signaling.
Sure.
A lot of the faculty that they've spoken with they say, oh yeah, they're pro diversity and equity, inclusivity and everything like that. But then when it comes to actually supporting students or supporting policies on those campuses, they find that the faculty don't do anything. And I think you're totally right. I think culturally, like the whole concept of the white dominance and the way American culture, the way we express information, I think personally, that's the same way we have it for people when people have these conversations. But how do we get people to be more open to the conversation? Because you're right, I think we need to look at the numbers, look at the data and everything like that. But so many people just focus on no, like we need to listen to 5 minutes why this is so important. How do we actually create a space for faculty to even be open to like listen and to have positive conversations?
Because the value here is strong too. So sometimes the numbers don't even matter, right? Because it's just what their current beliefs are, and that this is how we should be doing something. So yeah, it's a good question.
I think there's fear behind that, is like of loss, like, well then what's going to happen to me? You know what I mean? Then what's going to happen to me, my job,
It comes back to the I, right? Like what's going to happen to me?
Yeah. I do think that, yeah, that's a pretty significant thing right there.
And I know that's so hard for all three of us, because I think, at least for myself,
I think it's truthful,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, I'm sitting back and I would say to myself, okay, well where's my end game here, right? What would happen to me? And so I think a lot of people think that way, right? And then if you are from a different culture, different background, different racial ethnicity, you're probably going to view it that way too, because
Yeah.
you're the one that's going to be affected.
Sure. I think only if you if you see things playing out as it's kind of like, some people talk, what is it, the zero-sum game thing, or
Yeah.
I don't really use that term very much, but if you see that the only sort of way out is for people of color then to kind of come into the positions, and you have to give up your spot because there's only enough spots, rather than
a big argument
the
too.
fact that that's just not the only option. The option is that we could be one really large, like I was talking about collaboration, is there's actually enough. There really actually is enough. And really, if we could get over some of this, we would be spending time on other things. Like as a nation, like as a people, like as an entity, we could be, if everyone was given the opportunity to have enough. I think part of it is this misunderstanding that, how do I explain this? If we were to do things where there's more inclusion, then it would follow the same way we're doing things now. Which means somebody has to be left out. But actually, that's not the only way to do things.
Yep.
So it's hard, I think, for people to imagine there's a third way. There's another way.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the third, but there's a whole other way that you're having a hard time picturing right now, because you're picturing the new way as being still the old way, which is somebody's the winner and somebody's the loser. But really,
And all we did was just change guard,
and just
right?
see who, yes, exactly. We just changed, when no, that's actually not the only other
It's
option.
kind of like a false dilemma you fall into, which is
exactly.
this either or thing.
Exactly,
right?
because that's the way we're living right now.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're saying is that there really is another way. Probably more. There's not only one other way. There are many other ways to be doing things, and greed, and you don't get anything so that I do. I get more than you. That's really literally not the only way. And so, because that's the predominant way right now, it's hard, I think, for people, particularly people who are considered like the winners in that game, to imagine another way that does not. And I think of also a lot of people who are in place of privilege in this, and I know people hate that word too, but there are benefits to being certain color of skin, light versus dark. That's really a real thing. I know some people don't.
I got light skin privilege.
Exactly, but which is ironic, because in some cultures you aren't. You and I even would be the dark member of my family, quote unquote, right?
Oh yeah.
And so, because I'm come from Black community, I am light skinned. But if I've seen people more fair than me, who say, oh yeah, in my family, I'm the darkest one. And it's all of that stuff, right? And again, this isn't only about race, it's about ability, it's about age, it's about all these different things. But it really literally does not have to be this way. Only thing you know, and the only way you can imagine is that it's this. You only can see then that I have to lose something in order for you to gain access. And well, with that framework, that might be true.
Yeah. Then how do you think we can encourage students? Because I like how you said that it's because part of it's the way of thinking, and possibly that we have a lack of teachers of color and community-based teachers because we have so few people applying, even though the data shows no, a lot of people of color apply, they just don't get hired and everything. One thing I've had to speak with my mentee and a couple of their friends who are considering being a teacher, their two criticisms against being a teacher is, one, why would I want the job? It pays crap. And then second, Like, why would I want to work for an institution that is in some way already inherently racist?
Sure.
I think a lot of students of color and minority students don't see the benefit of getting to the teaching profession
Sure.
because they think it doesn't pay well and they think it's too hard of a struggle to get in. Because one of the other things that we don't talk about is also teacher burnout. I think one of the people we were speaking with at one of the meetings the other day is the burnout for teachers in K-12 is like within 3 years, and at the college level,
It's 5.
it's like a 5-year burnout. We both have coworkers who have been struggling in this profession, and within like 5 years, like, you know what, this is too much
Sure.
like hassle. I'm out.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, I don't know if you were the other day when Brandon spoke, and he was talking about his fire and friends is what he called it, and he was talking about, and the fire part I think is what I talk about when I say about development of critical consciousness. It's really understanding that becoming a teacher, yes, it is for your subject. So I love math, you might love language arts or some other whatever.
Communications.
Okay, that's your thing, right? Okay, so I love my subject, but I also love teaching. And part of what I love about teaching was helping students to, knowing, have you ever seen that thing where it says how many black teachers have you had, or when was the first time you had a black male teacher is one of the things, right? And then it got opened up because I was like, God, I had one as a swim coach when I was about 4, and then I had another one in college, and that was it. And then, so I thought, wow, I hadn't really given that thought to that. And then I am the answer then. I am the answer to that question for some students. When did you have a black teacher?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is part of the development of your critical consciousness, is understanding that becoming a teacher means that you are part of the future by holding that space for young people as they are going through their education journey.
I remember again, I was my first year out of my grad program, and I landed a position at La Sierra University out in Riverside. And I walked into the class. It was my first time ever teaching on a religious campus, right? So I think there were Seventh-day Adventists, and they gave me just a long list of things I can and can't say in the classroom, topics I can and can't go over, right? And I get into the classroom, and the first thing I see is the entire class is white, and there's one black student in the class, just one. And I thought to myself, my goodness, I had just come from teaching at Cal State LA, where there was tremendous diversity, right? And I remember after the first week, that student walked into my class, and he said, my office, and he says, "Thank you for being here." Thank me. Normally you get the thank yous and stuff like maybe 3 months into the semester, right?
At the end,
the first week, he said, "Thank you for being here," right? Because we don't have a lot of teachers like you.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And I knew he was not talking about my lecture.
No, right. Well, I don't know.
You must have been so terrible that first year.
Yeah.
Like going from like university to like community college level teaching. Oh, that's a total change.
That's a different topic. That's just pay, right?
Right. But
pay and
that
opportunity.
is like, so what I was saying was, he talked about fire and friends. The fire can come from like when you start to drop into the hard parts and the burnout and if you're experiencing, racial microaggressions or any other kind, and all the other reasons why people want to leave, if you understand that, no, I'm actually needed here in the profession beyond just, part of it is me showing up, and showing up with a sense of understanding of how important for an education journey it is to have people who understand and have deep cultural competency, and also are bringing that to the space, not only to my classroom, but also within the school itself, being able to talk about these things and hold space for other educators who may or may not have much development in this area themselves. So it's important from that way. And then also friends. Having colleagues who both have your back and also just have a relationship with you. Those are the reasons, like for me, when I was just like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it any longer. Those were the two things that kept me. I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't conscious of the fact that part of the reason why my staying power had to do with the people, my colleagues who I cherished and who made the hard times more bearable. And I think with CPTP, actually, this brings me back to think about how the mentors right now, many of them have said that working with the student has actually been something that made them, when they thought they wanted to possibly retire early, working with the student has now allowed them to connect with their past selves, like why they came into the career, because they're talking about that a lot now. Also knowing that they can contribute to the future of education, having something to give.
It's like a self-evaluation, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not only evaluation, but just like a recharge.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the evaluation also, but also like it's given them sort of hope. They can see the sort of a future and that they are contributing to that. So I do think that I didn't stay because I loved math. I started partly because I loved math, and also just teaching because I was elementary also at first. But
How
I
long have you been
stayed.
teaching now?
Yeah, a lot of years. Yeah, I actually got my teaching credential from Cal State Long Beach in December of 1988, and I started teaching at Star King Elementary in Long Beach Unified in 1989.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and then
Right,
yeah,
very
and
cool.
I've also been in district.
Flex.
Then I went to Pasadena Unified. I went to grad school for a while. I went to Pasadena Unified for 9 years. Then I became really interested in charter schools because I wanted to know, this is my point of burnout was, I wanted to know, I got tired of all this control that they had over my classroom. I wanted to know if you could do things differently and have a little more of the decision-making power. Could things actually outcomes be different?
Mm-hmm.
I had an amazing principal in Pasadena Unified who allowed us to do a multi-age grouping. We had to write up a whole plan and everything, and we did 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and we moved them around in a day that was more like a middle school, so you weren't only in one class all day long.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It was transformational in my teaching career. And then that's when I wanted to know more about charters, because I wanted to see if you could do this rather than just in this one little school where this one administrator is letting us, but
Yeah.
on a bigger scale, does it change things? And so, and I
result.
think that I learned a lot from that experience. It was the best experience I think I've had in education. I think that both systems have problems. I think the district schools have problems. I think they hold neighborhoods captive for generations because you can't shut them down. Where charter schools, you can shut them down, right? You can change things. A district can come in and put in, different things. I do think that the charter system, the growth of charters did kind of call the bluff of school districts. It kind of said, like, prove it. Now you have to prove it. Things that you've said, well, this, that, and that. Now you've got to, we can come in. If you can only work in these sort of neighborhoods, well, we can come into these other neighborhoods and we can do something different here. I know that I don't think that charter means any one thing. To be honest with you, that's something I don't agree with. When you're talking about some charters who make a lot of money off of the whole enterprise, and then you're talking about other charters that were just started by a group of teachers. Those are two very different things. So I don't think charter means any one thing, and so that's a bothersome conversation when we refer to it as meaning one thing. But I do think that just, if we're just talking about this as a singular thing, I do think that the whole charter movement just pushed the need for districts to have to do something in neighborhoods where the district had been failing failing the neighborhood, failing a whole community, like I said, for generations.
Yeah, I think there's a school in the LAUSD that actually just failed, and I think the parents actually started their own charter school. Either that, or they had their own parent board of trustees because they voted no confidence, but then they couldn't they couldn't get rid of the board of trustees for that particular school. So it was all right, fine then. We'll make our own school, and we'll put our own kids in it and forget y'all.
Right, and so I think it helped push some of that. I think it didn't allow for almost like a monopoly in a way. So I think in that way, it's a good thing. But I think both of the systems have problems and also are successful at certain things. You know.
So on that note, I have one last question for you, Suzanne. To get more students of color into education. Why should students want to become educators?
I do like that term that he used, fire and friends. No, I think that I will say, kind of to the point of what we were talking about, I do think that we are, not just for students of color, I think for all students, and I think CPTP is focused on building, like you said, a community pipeline and hoping to encourage, students to stay or return to their own communities where they are. But I do think that understanding people who are not just like you is very important, and also for I would say some people think it's the representation part. I need to see people who are like me and feel that the ways that I just am, culturally and racially, are welcome and accepted. And people who come from backgrounds similar to mine help me to see that, like literally visually see that, and walk into a room that understands the ways that I navigate space and life. That is definitely a really important part of why teachers of students should be considering becoming teachers, because the more we can bring that into any space, whether it's our own neighborhood, which is definitely the push for CPTP, as well as if I live in a community where I am the unique, I'm one of the ones and onlys, of a black student in a certain part of wherever, Orange County, let's say.
Yeah. Thank you for
being here. We need that to become teachers also, exactly. Thank you for being here, because we are ones and onlys all over the country, and also white kids need to have teachers of color. They need to have Asian teachers. They need to have Native teachers. They need to have black teachers. They need to have Latinx teachers. They need to have, they need to have teachers in wheelchairs. They need to have teachers who are gay, lesbian, queer,
because that's where they're going to get the experience as well.
Right, and then we don't have to keep pushing this initiative, right? Because white children need to understand this so they can become white adults who understand this.
But I also think that when you do that, right, teachers from different multicultural backgrounds need to understand they're going to go through a process as well. So they're going to get backlash. They're going to get challenged by a lot of the white students.
Absolutely.
And that's where the learning is going to occur from both sides.
Yes.
Right? And they have to be open to that as well.
Yeah.
Because that can become a difficult environment for the teacher.
Yeah.
For the teacher, because they're going to be challenging all those ideologies that have been embedded in that student. So I think that's not talked about enough.
Sure.
Is the challenge that the teacher goes through in being put in that situation.
Yes. Well, and you mentioned virtue signaling.
Yeah.
And I think it stops virtue signaling, and it just becomes depth that is sincere.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a really good conversation. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for sitting
You were
down
awesome.
with us.
Thanks.
Yeah,
You were
thank you,
awesome.
Seth.
We have to check your schedule though, because we need to bring you back.
Yeah.
Great contribution to the
Thanks.
podcast. Lots of really unique points of view.
I need to connect you with some of my math colleagues at other campuses, because they always need help with how do they connect math to equity and diversity. So,
Sure.
yeah, thank you so
I'm
much.
going to
for
send you
coming
something. I actually have a link I'm going to send you that someone even talked about that. It's a short
All right.
video.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much.
Capture the passion.